Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of the World Report. I'm Scott Crowfoot. On today's report, gas prices are soaring, and the question is, how vulnerable is America's energy grid? What is happening to China's stock market and economy? And now even Democrats are speaking out against sanctuary cities in America. And our political insider, Scott Walker's in, but all the attention is still focused on the Donald. Will Biden run, and how will that affect Queen Hillary? Today's moment in history, the discredited president and his foreign policy accolades. But now to our top stories. U.S. President Barack Hussein Obama completely caves to the Islamic Republic of Iran, removing sanctions and paving a clear path to intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. Helping me to try and rationalize this absurdity is the World Report senior advisor and economics blogger for USA Today Online, Maury Beschloss, who can be followed on Twitter at @mbeschloss. Maury, how in the hell can America let this happen?
Well, when you say America, you're talking about 320 million American citizens, most of them who really either don't know or don't care. So it's left up to the politicians, the Republicans and the Democrats. I will say very emphatically, I am extremely disappointed in the Republican Party's behavior pattern in not standing up to this president and showing him any kind of strength against what he's doing to really tear this country apart and open it up to those who would have us annihilated.
How bad of a deal is this, in your opinion?
I think I put it in historical context, this is much worse than Munich in 1938. Munich in 1938 was when Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, went to Germany. And at first he was going to walk away because Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. Then when he came back to England, the people said, no, you got to make a deal. We're not ready for war. So he came back this time with the Prime Minister of France at his side. Hitler had Mussolini at his side and signed an absolute declaration that if he can get the Sudetenland, which had the majority of people of Germanic background, not Germans, but Germanic background, he would have no more territorial demands. Chamberlain was exhilarated. He came back, stepped off the plane, and said, this is peace in our time. We now will not have a war because Harry Hitler signed this statement. And he, as head of the German government, speaks for Germany.
Now, the Iranian regime has been playing games with this for decades now, and just pushing it down the road and kicking it down the road and giving them enough time to get technologically savvy and hide most of their nuclear ambitions and hide most of their facilities where they're putting together these missiles.
And they have plenty of those already.
And we're not even talking about banning their intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are going to be aimed at the West.
And by the way, just as an asterisk, there's about 5 American prisoners being held by Iran, and they were sold down the river without even being talked about.
And so much for the Bergdahl Rose Garden, where we don't leave anyone behind. We just left them behind, and maybe we've left the rest of the world behind as well.
No, the only one that we traded 5 murdering scum for a deserter.
So when Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina comes out and sternly is against this, it's got to be even worse than you and I can imagine, because he's not one of the guys that I look to for leadership in this country. But even Lindsey Graham has come out vehemently against this deal.
Well, I think your point is he's a good man, but he's not a very aggressively spoken person who gets upset about things that are happening to the United States. So your point is if a guy that's really never known to be very controversial gets up and says, we're being taken down the rat hole, then you begin to wonder that this is a vicious sellout. It's opening the door to people that would destroy us if they had the chance in 24 hours.
And even Bob Menendez, senator from New Jersey, who's come under fire, and he may not have anything to lose at this point because they're basically throwing him under the bus anyway, but he's even come out against this deal. But I noticed that Hillary Clinton and a lot of the Democrat leadership is all for this, which tells me that this has got to be one of the worst deals in American history.
It is. There's any part of it, because what you're doing is you're giving Iran $150 billion that was frozen in American banks.
By removing the sanctions.
By removing the sanctions, and the sanctions is the only thing that kept Iran in line by killing off their economy. Now what you're doing is you're restoring it. Now, granted, it's supposed to be a 60-day period where the Senate and Congress has a chance to discuss it. What they don't tell you is that Obama can veto whatever Congress does, and then Congress needs 2/3 votes in each house to override.
And that has to do with the Corker amendment that Bob Corker tried to put in. Otherwise, it would have been the other way around. It would have been 2/3 to make it happen versus a veto. So he basically screwed the American people by putting forth his amendment that got passed.
I agree with you. I think, it goes back to the fact that the great victory of the Republican Party in the midterm elections has turned out to be empty.
They squandered it.
They squandered it. They're still as weak and sniveling
and impotent
and also accommodating to the so-called president, quote unquote.
Now, I just read an article by our good friend Hal Lindsey, and he points out that this is straight out of the prophecy. This is exactly where the Bible has discussed things to go, with Russia coming in next to aid Iran. I know I might be getting a little bit out there in the weeds, but...
No, you're not. It's interesting. We haven't discussed it before. Hal Lindsey is one of my very intimate friends, has been for years, and this man has an insight into biblical history as it relates to actual historical
current events. Yeah.
And he's actually an academic, a great writer, a great historian, but also a man with great spiritual feeling.
And do you believe that we're seeing a prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes?
I believe it 100%. I really do.
And now we're going to have the Russians coming in and supplying some support to the Iranian regime.
Well, this is very interesting you bring that up. There was a meeting in a little town, maybe 100,000, called Ufa, U-F-A, in the Ural Mountains in Russia. It was last week. And it was, first of all, it was a trade group called the BRIC Group, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China. And they had a free trade agreement, no voting of parliaments, nothing. They just decided to do it. But what was even hardly mentioned was the SCO, the Shanghai Coordination Organization, which means it's a military security group. And they had observers. The observers were most of the former Soviet republics, and Iran was part of it, and Pakistan was part of it. So what you're seeing there is an alliance of anti-American organizations being formed very quietly, very effectively, and the tremendous power that America gained coming out of the Second War. You know, when we were always concerned about the fact that we've got two superpowers that are equal, which was nonsense. Russia was not an equal to the United States. They did have a land army that was much more powerful during the Second War, but afterwards, Russia didn't have a candle to stand up against the United States. And the fear was that it was going to be Russia and the United States, and the rest of the world would quake and shake in their boots. Well, what happened was that when the Soviet Union disintegrated because of Ronald Reagan's pressure and the Star Wars story, which was made up to scare the Russians that they'd have to come up with something similar. When that happened, Gorbachev, who became president, said, you know, the satellites and these additional republics are a liability. Let's go back to Mother Russia. I think Putin put it best when he said,
the greatest geopolitical disaster
of the last century.
Yeah.
And he was right from the standpoint of the basic relationship between powers in the world. So what you have right now, you had a period from about 1990, maybe it's about a 10-year period, because they had this Boris Yeltsin that succeeded Gorbachev was a weakling, and he did pretty much what the United States told him to do. So then everybody thought, well, now the United States is a sole superpower, and Russia isn't going to be showing its face anymore. So we go into the 20th century with the Clintons being the transition toward weakening the United States. We had a great chance to solidify our power. We got the wrong people leading us, and we're now in a position where the United States is in the weakest position, I think, since the end of the First War.
And it's interesting you bring up the Clintons, because in '94, Bill Clinton was out making a historic accord with North Korea, signed agreement, they weren't going to go nuclear, and we all know how that ended up. So who's the biggest loser in this deal? Is it America? Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it Israel? I mean, we talked a little bit about this off the air, and I'm not sure we completely see eye to eye on this.
No, we see the biggest winner in this particular situation is Iran.
Who's the biggest loser in this?
The biggest loser
Saudi Arabia?
Yes. Saudi Arabia is now feeling totally surrounded. They've got these Iranian.
You've got the Iranians in Yemen, which is right in their
the
backyard.
Houthi rebels. You already begin to see the fact that there's a basic formation of allies, which is interesting. You know, there's an old story that says common enemies make strange bedfellows. You've got Sisi in Egypt, you've got Saudi Arabia, you have Israel, you have Jordan, you have the United Emirates, all bending together now because they know they're dead ducks if the Iranians really gain more power. And the Iranians, I think the Iranians really are behind ISIS. I really do. I think they act like, they're more Sunnis, whereas the Iranians are Shias. But
terror is terror.
Do you know that ISIS is now not only active in the Sinai Peninsula, but they're also now in
Pakistan
Gaza.
and Afghanistan as well.
But they're in Gaza, which is even Hamas is afraid of ISIS. You're seeing power structures change, and what the structures are saying is the United States is in a very weak position, getting weaker, because we have a president who pays no attention to the House or the Senate, which is in Republican hands, and you have a Supreme Court that does his bidding.
The whole world has been dragged to the left, and it's being dragged down the sewer at the same time. We need to take a brief time out. We will return with our economic and energy update. We get lots of questions from viewers all over the world. It's simple and free. Just email your question or video to Maury@theworldreport.org. You might just see yours featured right here on this show. Remember to like us, leave comments, and for the latest news updates, visit Newsmax.com or watch Newsmax TV on Direct 349, Dish 220.